Awesome. So it says that we're live. And thank you to Tara for bringing all of this together. Yeah, I mean, I guess the topics are, do Black Lives really matter? And what can we do to make sure that everybody, I guess, is, gets to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all have that same equal footing when that pursuit is happening. Yeah, I mean, some of my background. First off, my name is Catherine Kylila Bullard. My middle name is Kylila, and that's what I prefer to be called by. It is of Arabic origin, and it means beloved. Yeah, and I grew up in a middle class household. My parents were the first parents to ever integrate their high school. They grew up in the 1960s ish. I think they kind of graduated maybe early 70s. But I'm from Tampa, Florida, which is one of the last states to actually integrate. And in fact, down there, their school systems are very segregated. Yeah, and I mean, like some of my experiences consist of when we moved into our neighborhood. Once the other people found out what our race was, we were greeted with the N word sprayed on the side of our house. When I was 8, we had our mailbox blown up by some of the neighbors, and no one, still found out who. And like every Christmas, we would have our black Santa Claus scene stolen. So that's, I guess, part of my first, I guess, like experience with like realizing that like I was different, and that the standards were kind of different for me. Yeah. I see that Dale finally joined. Do you want to introduce yourself, or? I guess so. Keep talking then. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, that was I don't know, like just like all of these things happened before I was 10 years old, and so just early on, I was taught that like I couldn't just be good, I had to be better. I couldn't be, I couldn't be like I couldn't feel right, like I had to always be logical. I had to sometimes numb some of the things like that were happening around me, so that way I could function, and so that way like they wouldn't win. And so there was always like this competitive drive that kind of encompassed, I guess, my childhood, was to like not be too black to where I would scare people, or be guilty of something that I didn't do, but to also like not be too white to where I forget who I am, and the long line of people that I come from. So that's just a bit of my background. That's how my childhood was. Also I was educated in a private school up until high school, and in that private school, like for the most part, I was the only black person. Maybe there would be like one to two other people throughout certain years, and yeah, it was just very interesting. One thing that really struck me was I decided to go to public school when I was in high school because I felt that there was this fear about poor people. There was this fear about people who looked like me, and that kind of bothered me because I had lots of white friends. I mean, that's who I lived with. And just to be clear, my family is black, but all of our neighbors, they were white, and so they couldn't hate me forever. So some of them became became some of my friends. And, um, and like with them, some of them would say some racist things and not realize it. Um, and like I would always sense, I guess like sense this fear with people who looked like me, but I would get the pass because they knew me, and so they knew that I was good. And so, anyways, I from private school went to public school to kind of experience what the other side was and to learn more about people that looked like me and what it was like from their perspective. Um, yeah, so that was pretty much like my childhood. And yeah, and the odd thing was that when I did go to like when I went to public school, cops were everywhere. We had one cop who was very like trigger happy. She would stand. I guess like we had a courtyard, and she would stand like in the middle of that courtyard, and certain people she would just like try to piss off, and like if they talked back to her, like she would tase them. When I went to public school, I remember like there was this other girl who like there was like this I don't know like this 1 hour limit using the library computers, but like she was doing a longer project and didn't want to leave her computer, and so instead of like trying to reason with her or like maybe calling her parents, um, uh, people just decided to call the school resource officer, and she was tased and taken out. So it was, like those are some of the differences that I saw was just how people treated people based off of class and what they looked like. Whereas when I was at the private school, there were kids like there were kids who did drugs. There were kids who were having sex behind the bleachers. There were kids who were talking back and were very entitled. But we didn't have cops, and like that would be like an extreme, uh, an extreme scenario if they were to bring in cops. At the very most, they would maybe like call their parents, and so I think just like the difference in discipline, I guess like in the difference of how people how people are brought up shapes their perspective, and can also I guess cause a bit of trauma. Like I know I was a bit traumatized seeing all of those people tased and like taken out just for like talking back or maybe having a bad day. But I only saw that for the last 4 years. Whereas some people and because the public school was not where I lived, like I only had to deal with that maybe like 8 hours out the day, maybe like 2 or 3 of that, because that would be like the after school time. Hey, is it working now? Uh, Still not yet, but yeah. So, if people have questions about, I guess, like, or comments about similar experiences, that would be cool to know. And then later we can, I guess, talk about, like, solutions and things that I see that need to happen and why. Um, is that a good place to start? Let's see. So can you all see? Oh, go ahead. Were you getting ready to speak?
Um, sure. Were you talking to me? I
Yeah.
couldn't tell. Um,
Sorry.
yeah. Um, can I share a bit of my background as well?
Oh.
Okay. So, I'm young, only 18, in college. My name tends to be in a state of fluctuation, but I go by Shajra for now. And for me, like, identity has always been a bit of a weird thing because I am like 75% Egyptian, but I was born in Arizona, and anytime you have to add a percentage to like your identity, it gets weird. And when I was little, I spoke Arabic, and I used to know the language, and then 9/11 happened, and things kind of changed in small town Arizona. There was threats, and people we knew were getting hurt, and trash on our doorstep, and I don't know, things just developed, and I was very young at the time, and so my mother stopped talking to me in Arabic, and we sort of fled and lived on the road for a while with friends who take us in from place to place. So I, but that was like when I was very young. So by the time like I grew more into myself and I developed an identity, I didn't really know where to stand because I don't speak Arabic, and while I love Egyptian food and my family and like the TV shows during Ramadan because they make specials for the holy month, I never felt too connected to the culture. And then at the same time, though, I was always seen as somehow not American because I was different. So I've always had this weird in-between thing where I never knew quite where I fit in. And I always like the example of like second-generation immigrant. That term doesn't really make sense because you don't immigrate. Um, for personal experiences with this, it was strange because I also went to a very privileged like elementary school with well, I mean, I could count the people of color on one hand and still have a thumb. And then I think like fifth or sixth grade, I transferred into me and my mom moved to a bigger house because we had my little brother, so we switched neighborhoods, and that was a much more like lower socioeconomic background there, which was probably more fitting for where I was. But there's like this sort of sudden spectrum of people, and it wasn't just other. There was things that I didn't identify with, but I could see more diversity in my daily community, and that was really amazing until I hit about middle school. And then in middle school, it was a uniform school. We had security guards and cops coming through all the time, and there's a sort of system there that if you got into the advanced classes, you were given harder homework, more encouragement, more resources, and you were sort of tracked to succeed. But if you weren't, you were suddenly told, you know, how much does school really matter? You know, do you really need this? You were treated a lot more criminal, just even within the school dynamics, and that's something I saw progress more as I continued through education, that were people's projections for the future, like started going back to elementary school placements. And it created this sort of cycle that I've seen, which I guess isn't directly related to police violence, but it does sort of set up the scene of cyclical poverty that leads to exposure of, you know, violence, a lot of the trauma you were discussing.
Yeah, have you ever...
Hello?
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
Cool.
Oh, finally made it in. Sorry I'm late.
It's okay. Do you want to...
Kylila?
Hey, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah, this is Adedayo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So this is Adedayo. Hi. Hi, everybody. So who else is here?
So Tara's running like the tech behind the scenes, and then Shashira, I hope I said that correctly. I'm gonna have to practice that. Go ahead.
Shajra.
Okay.
Shajira. Okay. He is also here, and then we also have people watching live via YouTube. So these are the people who are in the room who are speaking, but then we also have other people who are watching. And
okay,
yeah.
great.
Yep, and so
Okay. So
just
I guess if we introduce.
Mhm. Oh, I was gonna give you I guess like a quick recap of about like what we kind of done so far. Pretty much we just talked about like our personal
Okay.
background. And we had gotten to the
Okay.
point about the difference in education and how that starts breeding I guess like breeding like criminal behavior, or like starts encouraging people to be more criminal based off of expectations within the differences of the differences of education. So but go ahead and take it wherever you want.
No, I think that's a perfect start, because education, I hear, is from everything about the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of the solutions that I've been paying attention to stems from education and the differences in education. So that's a big base of it, and I'm just also wondering if anybody has had any personal experience with the issue at hand, personally, as for yourself, because I was telling her that for me, based on my background, I relocated to the U.S. It was when with the idea of what racism is and all that stuff. So so basically, there's a, how do I put it? For my African background, being Nigerian and coming more about the history of African Americans and the issues that we're facing in society, so kind of like a culture shock sort of a thing, But then I'm very curious as to what your experience is, and then maybe we can kind of take it into from our personal experience.
Okay, so I hope that.
This
Oh,
is, this is frozen. My screen is frozen. I don't know. Can you hear me?
somewhat. Your audio has been going in and out.
Okay.
So can you ask the end part of that question just so I can make sure that I understand it clearly before I start speaking?
Okay. No, I was saying I would love to hear your background. I was just sharing my background from being Nigerian. So because everyone has a different experience of this the Black Lives Matter movement, and
Right.
that's like the topic where we're focusing on. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want us to generate
Right.
conversation from our personal experience, so we know where our knowledge base is, and then kind of develop it from there into talking about why, what really is the things, like talking about the education or economic factors that.
I think she froze. So I'm
Are
going
you
to.
there?
Yes. Yes. Can
Yeah, this
you?
is, I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Well, I think I can answer. Or I guess recap.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess to tailor where my person, so before I had, I guess, told you about pretty much the time I was born until high school. But to go into further detail about why, or I guess like my personal feeling with the criminal justice system and Black Lives Mattering is that when I was in high school, so one of my friends actually, he was in our senior class, super funny, and and he died from getting shot, and his name was Gregory Allen, and nobody pursued like the person who like the person who shot him. He was pretty much just like labeled like another poor black kid, and case closed. Oh well, sorry, right? And so since since the majority of my childhood was spent in a private school, and since I lived mainly amongst white people in a suburban place where if something like that were to happen, like the cops would be there, there would be a full investigation, like it wouldn't just be like, oh well, I'm sorry, and to see that kind of lack of like that lack of empathy,
Yeah.
really, I guess, like struck me, and like literally, like we look different, like the only thing is that he lives in a different place, and he has a stronger accent, and
Yeah.
he comes from a different family and lives, so that part really struck me, and then once we had all graduated, and we went to college, one of the nicest guys who I have ever known. His name is Watson, and in high school he was a giant football player, but like everybody called him Teddy because he was like like he was very soft, like like if someone tried to fight him, like he would end up laughing.
Yeah.
Like he could not, he had, couldn't be mean or anything. So anyways, he he had come back to like visit his family during one of our college breaks, and by this time he had a daughter, and they were driving, and for whatever reason they got into like this road rage incident, and the man who cut him off was this older man who got out of the car, for whatever reason had an ice pick in it, and like started arguing, and it escalated like to the point to where like the guy ended up killing him with an ice pick. And thanks to Florida's stand your ground law, nothing happened. And like if you are unfamiliar with the stand your ground law, it's the same law that George Zimmerman pretty much got off on, which was if you feel threatened, right? Which which in itself is a huge bias, right? Because people feel like if somebody's racist, they're gonna feel threatened by me because I'm black, right? So like if somebody does not like black people, if if someone is afraid of black people, then just my presence, is pretty much saying that like that's a justification like for you to kill me. And so like that's what happened. I think like the first year that I graduated out of high school. I was in college, and and like we all came back and like heard that, hey, Watson was killed with an ice pick in Florida by a guy who was afraid of him, and therefore is justified in doing so. So that was crazy. So yeah, so those are two, I guess, stories with like me and the justice system. Now I personally, like, I have never had a bad experience with law enforcement, but like I said, a lot of that is due to where I lived, and then also like the fact that that my parents are also super educated. We are surrounded by lawyers, so we have never had a problem with like cops. But but I have witnessed many of my friends like get get a different type of justice. One thing that I will say is that I have been profiled quite a bit.
Yeah.
Simply because of where I live and all of that other stuff. And so, but I've been profiled so much, the cops in the area know me. So it's just like, give or take. But yeah, so that's the unfortunate part of it. So class and money also plays a factor as to how much racism or how much inequality people experience. But but there's no denying that race is still there. So yeah, I don't know. Did you want me to keep going about like different solutions that I think need to happen, or
If
did
it
you
wants-
want to add something?
No, I was saying is if there was anybody else. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. It's just your
Okay.
audio is still choppy. There's a huge delay.
Okay. No, I'm asking, I'm asking if there's anybody else on the call that wants to contribute. So I was asking Shajara what his side of it is.
Okay. I'd kind of gone over it a bit earlier, but I
Okay.
can summarize it, and it's uh, I've always been kind of transitory, and it will, like, even my name's change, and I've always felt sort of torn between two identities, between being Egyptian and being American, but really more American because I was born here and raised here, but never fully accepted here in many ways because of my Arab ancestry. And so what I talked about a lot of was this in-between thing with my identity playing into not really knowing where I fit into the grand scheme of the bigger struggle and how I came to observe it very similarly to the education and the environment I lived in.
Adeo, would you mind putting your mic, I guess like on mute whenever, because I guess like it's picking up other sounds, and so when other people are speaking, it switches to your camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So do you want to continue, Shajara? And please correct me if I say your name wrong, because I need to hear it more. Like I want to get it right, right? So, like, don't just let me mispronounce your name. I know, like we as people of color, we. I know I tend to take like the easy route of just, yes, even though that's not my name. So don't let me mispronounce your name.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's Shajara. Um,
Okay.
I often just say Steve if I don't feel like correcting people.
Steve?
Yeah, you don't have a name you default to. That's a lot easier in like situations where you don't want to have to explain a story.
Well, so that's interesting. Do you want to like expand on that a bit?
Sure. Well, okay. So Steve first came when I was in kindergarten, and
Hmm.
my first name legally is Rushdie, and I was named after my grandfather. And I went to a predominantly white school then, and one day my mom gets called into the principal's office because I'm having behavioral issues, they tell her. And so she's really worried. She doesn't know what's going on. She gets off work to come in, and when she comes in, they say, Rushdie's been asking his teacher to call him Steve. Uh, could you ask him what's going on? Is it some sort of trauma? They were like really concerned, which is good. But really, when I responded, I said, she calls me Woosty, Rooster, Washti. It was just that she'd constantly mispronounced my name, that I said she might as well call me Steve because she can say that. And I guess that's, even though I do choose new names, I like convoluted ones. So it's sort of this tiledness of explaining my identity that Steve is a lot simpler. It's also why sometimes I say I'm Mexican instead of Arab, because I live in San Diego and it's a border town, and there's a weight to having to explain who you are to strangers just because they don't recognize it, you know?
Wow. And so you've kind of done this, I guess, like as a survival method is what I'm hearing, right? Like, you know, as a way to, I guess, be accepted by the larger community, or like as a way to, yeah, I mean, like just survive. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. It wasn't conscious, but yeah, it's in a lot of ways a survival thing.
Yeah, and that's very similar to like what I did when I went to college. Like the college that I went to was like 80% male, and it was also what was it, like 82% white. And so you know, so typically like at the school, you know, we are called by yeah, I mean, like, you know, when people wanted to call me like by my first name to get more on a personal level, they would all call me Catherine, which is my first name, which is what I said, like, you know, in the beginning, instead of Kylila, you know, or they would shorten it down to KK, and I was okay with KK, but you know, still, like, you know, like there is this type of, I guess, like if, you know, like if who you are doesn't fit into the typical, I guess, Caucasian narrative of the typical, you know, of like what it is to be an American, you know, I do think that people who, you know, just don't fit that mold tend to suppress some of who they are and like some of their identity. And I think like you know, like I think that suppression has kind of aided in, you know, like in us not understanding one another, and I think that I think that has contributed to, you know, like to some incorrect biases that you know, like that exist when different systems are created, such as our justice system. Did you follow that, or was that a bit too much of a? Okay, cool. Yeah, awesome. You know, because like I think it's very important for people to examine how biases exist and how biases are created, because, you know, like those in power, like nobody ever wants to be a bad person. Like not many people wake up like, you know, I'm going to unjustly criminalize like this group of people this morning, or, you know, I'm going to you know, shoot someone and call it justified. Like, I don't believe, I mean, I'm a bit of an optimist, right? Some people like to say that people are just evil, but I like to think that, you know, for the most part, people who choose to be in positions of power, you know, want to use that power, like want to use that to help people. However, I think a lack of understanding of who people are due to this survival method that you know, that a lot of people of color do, you know, like in order to assimilate into American culture, I think kind of keeps the cycle going. You know, and I know that, you know, some could argue that what I'm saying right now is that we are contributing to our own oppression. But I don't think that's the case. I think, you know, systems are set up to, you know, I guess, you know, to run a certain way. and we have been conditioned as a way to survive to follow, to follow that system. And the only way to change a system is to become aware of how it's set up. And one, since these systems are for people and were created by people, just in general, we have to understand people. And that first starts with understanding ourselves and, our own things that we have done to, I guess, to conform or to fit in, and how to be okay with being different, or how to be okay with, forcing someone to say our names correctly, or forcing someone to to like learn about the different percentages of cultures like that we are. I think oversimplification, right, and like generalizations are different aspects of racism. Like nobody likes to come to the fact that they are racist, except for white supremacists, right? But they, have just taken it and run with it. But the majority of Americans, who in fact have racist qualities, don't realize it. Because like I said, like the majority of people want to believe that they are good. But there hasn't been a deep enough exploration of culture and of self to understand that, some biases may be incorrect, and there also hasn't been I guess there hasn't been enough models as to look at how to change that, right? And so bringing that back to education, I think our first step, because also our biases, they are greatly influenced with what we are taught in school. And so I think, a very easy step is to change curriculum. Is to empower teachers to teach a more full history, and then to also add in more behavioral science classes, so people, especially kids, as we are growing, like the main thing with teenagers is figuring out who we are, and the main thing in college is figuring out who we are, right? But nobody tells us how to do that. Like there's no exercises, or or there's very little formal exercise that talks about, what is your identity? What is your purpose? Why are you here? Where do you come from? And how do you interact with the world? Most of that is like master's level education. And not that many people make it that far. Like the way our education system is kind of set up is that we pretty much say that that it is a privilege to not be racist. That it is a privilege to to learn how to examine yourself. And I think that needs to start in primary education. What do you think?
Basically, I think everything you've said obviously makes a lot of sense. But also, then, in addition to what you're saying, just the awareness of each other's culture. So culture and diversity, like what you were initially saying, is a big thing that we all need to be aware of. And also going back to keeping the conversation alive. So the conversation on race and identity is a topic of identity and race and culture. This is something that should always be ongoing, that we should keep talking about, educating each other on where we're at in terms of race and who we are as a people, and everybody just sort of coming together in unity to understand each other's backgrounds, to understand each other's differences. So I think that's a big one going forward. also, the thing with race.
So I think. Okay, go ahead.
I didn't really get much of that. Could you maybe?
Yeah, I can try. I didn't get much of that either. Do you want to try again since you're back? So a lot of your audio broke, and what I got from it was that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Was off. There. I don't know what's going on with my connection. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Maybe it was the hands-free I was using. So where did you get and where did you call me out from? This is very annoying because it keeps breaking up.
Yeah,
Can
well,
you
right
hear?
now you were great. I pretty much from the beginning. Uh,
Yeah.
so if you could, like, I guess restate that if you don't mind.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So basically, I started by saying talking about culture and diversity and how recognizing each other's differences is such an important conversation that should until something happens before we again. So this conversation should be amongst us as young people, or how can we create dialogues to encourage it to educate each other on our differences? That's what I was saying. And also going back to the idea of police, the issue of police brutality and against blacks when you get pulled over. I was talking about a recent conversation I had on Wendy Williams with Roland Martin, how she had made a statement and he went back to educate her about black people. It was such a viral video, and he said something so powerful that when you get pulled over, the first thing is to make sure you get home alive. And that just brings how real this issue of police brutality is and the issue of race is. If you get pulled over, you want to just make sure you get a life. So even though that we hope that the police and the criminal justice system would realize that there's a way you're already in a position of authority, so you don't really have to enforce authority because just by you being a police officer, you wear a badge that people should automatically respect. So there's no need for force. Even though we hope that they know that, then they shouldn't have to accept first or treat black people like animals, like respectful as you can to a police officer and just wait, just watch out for things like their names or their license plate number or something like that that you can later go back to fight for your justice if you're being treated wrongly by a police officer. So I think those are sort of the conversations that we need to have because they're actually like very real, and even though they're not what we want to hear in many instances, it's something that I myself I will be, if I get pulled over for any reason, it's something that I'm just going to overlook and or so that this can't happen to me.
You're breaking up again.
Happen
You want to try talking again, or?
about their lives, really. So in your
Yeah, your audio keeps going in and out. But from what I gathered was that pretty much uh, you were talking about making sure like that you get like the officers like a way to identify to identify police, like if if as a person of color you get pulled over, so that way you can fight for fight for your justice, and kind of even out some of the power dynamics, because also not having people not know who you are, like that is a privilege. And so by breaking down that, and also I guess taking identity uh, to a surface level of just knowing who it is you're talking to, I guess are some further steps. And to take that one step further, I think I guess like another solution is to make police, is to make the system of policing a bit more transparent. Like, some people say that back in the day, like the whole function of police was to keep slaves, I guess, like in line, right? Like, if a slave ran away, it would be the police to go get them. But for white people, for the most part, cops served their community. It was a cop's job to make sure that everybody was safe. And so historically, I guess like policing has served two different purposes. And I think because again, I guess like in our system, we kind of have not explored our full American history. Therefore, we haven't really taken the steps to kind of address it. And what I mean by that is that, like if if we don't ever recognize that the systems that were created were separate, right? Like separate, separate but equal was around until like the 1960s. People lived in two totally different worlds. If I was born, maybe 40 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, I would have to use a separate restroom. I would have to, I couldn't eat at certain places. And so I think a lot of what we are seeing is these two separate worlds trying to become one. And because we haven't acknowledged like the history of the effects of the separation, we have a lot of people running around, not really doing much. And so with that, like our struggle today is to fully integrate everything, right? So like when so when Martin Luther King was here, right? And he did the famous "I Have a Dream" speech that everybody wants to quote. But he also said a whole bunch of other speeches about economic inequality, about how poverty kind of helps helps the prison system, about how privatizing prisons actually helps people become criminals, because it's pretty much like slave labor. And I don't know like how familiar you all are with Michelle Alexander's book, and it's called The New Jim Crow, and it pretty much talks about how when prisons became owned by private companies, now now you were battling economics, and you were battling government's revenue, because governments private prisons help local economies. And so when you have a money aspect to a prisoner, and like that prisoner is like helping to fuel like that local economy, if you have less prisoners, then that money still has to come from somewhere. And so that's where that's where people become targeted based off of biases that 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 kind of help these systems that were created separately to not function for everybody. So I got the note that we kind of need to start wrapping up and having any closing different closing remarks. Is there going forward? Is there anything that you all would like to see us do? Like, and I'm starting, and to clarify, like I don't mean big, overarching, vague things like change the education system. I mean stuff that like we can literally work on and do like tomorrow.
Basically, I think that, more conversations like this for sure, more youth-led conversations, because the people who are victims are young people who are tentatively the future. So we need to just rally around each other, and this is not going to be the first, or the last session. There will basic community strategies that we can implement in each other's regions going forward. So those are immediate things I think we can do. So, just to keep the conversation going, and definitely.
Awesome. Anything from you, Sajara? Did I say
Sajara,
it?
are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay, just a few quick things. To the thing you had said earlier about when you get stopped, the first thing on your mind is getting home alive. Something I sort of don't know where I picked it up, but it was this habit of yes sir, no sir, and then internally making sure to read a badge number, because cops wear badges with personalized numbers on the front, and that's an easy way to identify them if something were to happen. In terms of solutions, it's funny, I do think a change needs to happen to the education system, but much more in the funding. Something you hear a lot when you hear about biases is that, and it's actually pretty valid comments, is that these profiling oftentimes comes from cops working beats where there's more violent crime and there's more poverty, and that's correlated to race because of the systems we have. And I think the property tax system we have now, where your school's funding is directly applied by who lives around it, allows for that. So I'm always scared to say the word socialize, because then you lose half the country. But like socializing the standards of education a bit more, and then allowing add-ons to be through tutors or community programs, so that there's higher levels across the board, needs to be done. In terms of within your communities, it sounds paradoxical, but actually going and meeting the police officers who work your beat, I know my community this weekend is having a officer walk, where they're just going to walk around and meet people, and I think events like that, where you start creating a counter-narrative that does counteract this ingrained bias through just years of exposure, helps before we have systematic change. And then also, something for me that changed a lot the more I got involved in my community is actually through a library chili cook-off with the public services came, is when you meet someone and you shake your hand and they have a name, it creates a different relationship than the vague notion of blue and tan or blue and black.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. So I guess your solutions for the most part was about changing experience, and then creating more empathy. Right. And so the things that I think needs to happen is so I also work or one of my mentors is involved with the systemic justice project here at Harvard Law. And so one of the things, that I'm a huge advocate for is just changing all, all of American education. And I think bias and identity training needs to, needs to be reinforced at like every level, just so people understand how they are thinking and know how to check. Also, I do think there needs to be a separate accountability system. So that way, if we do get some corrupt cops, uh, both those good cops, they can, they can turn their bad cops in and not fear for their lives or for their jobs, and also citizens can, can find a, like an outside source that kind of holds these people accountable, right? Because people all have flaws, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so if there is no checks and balances, you're gonna get some people turning corrupt. So there needs to be outside, and the thing that we can do to start today is, taking your approach, going to town hall meetings, going to the different police departments, but also volunteering within schools. I think like what people need most is just for us to be there and to be willing to be open and to be, to be present and to be open to listening to one another, to the problems, and to really experience what is going on, while also examining our own bias. That's what I think each one of us can do starting tomorrow. Is just finding an aspect of the system like that, that we feel passionate about changing, and then volunteering in that small little aspect so that we can learn it a bit better, and then building a relationship with those in power, and then offering feedback. So and then holding them accountable for that feedback once we build that relationship. So I think that is all for now. It is now, well, over here where I am, I'm on the East Coast. It's now 10:02 p.m. I think over there, that's what time is it over where you all are at? 7? Okay, cool. So I think that's it. Tara, was there anything else that you wanted us to do? Did you have like question and answer, or is that it for tonight?
No, nothing on my end. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope, and I think we'll do this again as well, so please tune in for the next time. Thank you to our facilitators.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.